Okay. So first of all, last time we talked, I forget in what context, about wars in which God, like if God is responsible, if fights the Israelites' wars, and so I thought I remembered that Saul's war against the Philistines, God is not mentioned as a participant, and it's not true. He is mentioned, but the wars that come afterwards against the Ammonites, Edomites, Moabites, and Amalekites are successful wars that are not described or hinted at as miraculous, or that there's any sort of non-human intervention, like that they're not normal, run-of-the-mill earthly wars. And the same thing, and we're going to talk about this war a little bit when we get to Judges, but in Judges 20, what is it? Verse 18. So there's a civil war between the Israelites and the tribe of Benjamin. This is at the very end of Judges. And
it's in the aftermath of the
concubine in Gibeah, Gibeah. So the two sides mustered, and the Israelites, the 11 tribes, went to the temple and asked God, and asked who should lead us into this war against Benjamin, and God said, Judah first. And they went to war, verse 19, and the Benjaminites came out and kicked their butts. And then the second time, so it just continues. They again asked God, should we go up again? And God says yes. And again, the Benjaminites win. And only the third time, God then kind of helps or it says that, where is it? So the second day is verse 25, and then 26, they go again and sacrifice to God, and then the third day God, oh my goodness, this is long. Here, verse 35. God is participating in the Israelite victory over Benjamin. But the first 2 days, apparently, against God's preferred side, the war goes the other way. Okay, so look, I think in general, look, wars, football games, all sorts of things happen. Earthquakes, rain, fall naturally. And separately, God can get involved. God can conduct miracles. But there's no suggestion that the rainfall is a divine intervention, or that the victory of the Celts over the Schmelts, that everything is directed by God. Some things God intervenes, but otherwise things just happen. Okay, so let's get to our. So we have, before we join Joshua in invading the land of Israel, we owe ourselves a discussion about the chosen people. Okay, Mount Sinai, and the alliance, or the covenant between God and the Israelites. Now, I think I told you in our first meeting that there was no precedent in the ancient world for a God that had a people that were his people. Okay? Gods either came with a locality or with an empire. Okay? But the gods, whether they were imperial gods or local gods, were not exclusive ethnically. Okay? There wasn't a people that this is their God, and the Jewish God chose a nation to be his nation, leaving other nations to worship their false gods without... It doesn't offend the Jewish God that these nations observe other religion or worship their gods. Okay, the Jewish God insists on being worshipped only by his own people, only by the Israelites. And again, that's different from religions that came before Judaism, where again, if it's a local god, then whoever it is, doesn't matter if you're a Midianite or a Philistine or an Israelite, this is the divine power in this locality. And the same goes for imperial gods. They have jurisdiction wherever the empire holds sway, holds power. So this unique relationship between this God and this nation was different from religions that came before Judaism, and also from religions that came after Judaism, Christianity and Islam. Okay? So the newer religions offer themselves to all of humanity, whereas Judaism is just for this one people. Of course, you can join, but you have to join the Jewish people in order to join this cult. So the tension that we modern people often talk about when we talk about Jews, the tension over what Judaism is. Is it a nation? Is it an ethnic group? Is it a religion? Is it all of the above? Is it some of the above? This tension is there only in the modern era. Okay? Judaism, in the time of from the time of the Bible up until a few hundred years ago, was primarily a family. It was a nation or a tribe. Yeah, but it was a collection of tribes. But okay, nation. Okay, it was a family of people rather than a religion. Okay, so it was a nation that had its own national god, and therefore its own national form of worship or religion. And I'll try to illustrate that to you on the authority of the Torah itself in this Mount Sinai setting that we read a few weeks ago. When the Israelites created the golden calf, if you can turn to Exodus 32. Exodus 32, verse 9 to 13.
So I have the Lord further said to Moses, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, and I may destroy them and make you a great nation. But Moses implored the Lord.
Destroy them. I'll destroy the Israelite and make you, Moses, a great nation. Okay.
But Moses implored the Lord, saying, the Lord God saying, let not your anger, O Lord, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth.
Right, and he says in 13, remember that you vowed to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Israel is Jacob. Moses he basically admonishes God, you have to remember your promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, so he reminds God that you, God, made an alliance with this family, with Abraham's family, with Abraham's line. Okay? And in that promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God promised that Abraham's seed, or I guess Jacob's seed, that his offspring will become a nation and inherit this land. Okay? So God never, in that alliance, the the covenant of the pieces, and all the other promises made, again, to the three patriarchs, God didn't say that his chosen nation will be constituted of the people who believe in God or follow God's religious law, that he will give them 400 years from now in the desert. Okay? His promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was to be the eternal ally of this family through the generations and to give them this land. Okay? The religion, the Torah, the religious law, that was a much later addition. Okay? So the Torah is the foundation of this national religion. Okay? But the Israelite family came much, much earlier. God came to save the Israelites from Egypt before he gave them the Torah. Okay, so the Israelites had a long history as a people, and specifically as God's chosen people, well before God gave them their religious law at Mount Sinai. Okay? So since antiquity, since the time of the Bible and through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and early modern era, Jews always understood themselves to be a people. Whether you choose to some people think that nation is a kind of a modern concept. I happen not to, but it doesn't matter. But whatever euphemism we'd use for it. But again, a family, okay, which had its own national religion. And of course, outsiders can join this family, just like outsiders can join your family or my family. And this process includes joining the family's religion. Okay? And this understanding of Judaism as a family is still there 100% in Orthodox Judaism. Okay? The form of Judaism that reigns in Israel and is a very small minority in the diaspora. But Reform Judaism, which is the dominant stream in the US, is more unclear about it, about whether Judaism is a nation or a religion. Okay? My point is that the chosenness of the chosen people was never because of something the Israelites did to earn it. And this is what Moses says to God in this passage you just read. Okay? Moses explains to God, after the golden calf, that God didn't choose the Israelites. Okay? He didn't choose the Israelites. He chose Abraham. Okay? And he was therefore stuck with the Israelites. But the alliance was with Abraham, and whatever comes out of his loins. Okay? And so you struck a bargain with Abraham, and that's why the Israelites are the chosen people, not because they did something to earn it or because they're uniquely virtuous or whatever else. But it's an alliance with the patriarch. Okay? Now there's this will be kind of a circuitous route, but there is I have a point here. So there's a Talmudic debate, or again, this debate among scholars from 2,000 years ago or so, that went on for hundreds of years, about the choice involved in Jews becoming the chosen people. Okay? So one camp argues that God chose the Jews and the Jews chose God. Okay? It's a reciprocal choice, kind of like a husband and a wife. Okay? That we both choose each other and now we're together. Others claim, another school of thought claims that it was not a willing choice that's reciprocal, but that God chose the Jews and compelled them to be his people, like a master and his captive, or a master and his slave, rather than like a husband and a wife. So it was not the Jews' choice to accept or reject or to contemplate it. Okay? It was God's choice alone. And the reason, without getting too deep into this, but the reason why there's this debate is that there's a kind of a, again, this Talmudic, it's called a midrash. It's like an explanation of a biblical scene, or an explanation of what the Jews said to Moses when he came down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments. And what they said was that, the quotation is, all that God has spoken, we will do and we will hear. Okay? We will do and we will hear. Rather than saying, what we usually would expect is, what God has spoken, we will hear and then we will do. Okay, so do you see why these scholars felt a need to solve some sort of problem here with this sentence?
So doing before hearing would be, you don't think about it, you just do it.
Right. It suggests that you don't have a choice. Okay. Doing first and hearing later or listening later indicates that you're agreeing to follow the terms of an agreement without knowing the terms of the agreement. Okay. It's like going to buy a car and saying, I will pay and then I will listen to the price. Okay. So look, if you turn to Exodus 24:7, this is the scene. You'll see that translator, you can see these debates always in the translation, because any translator, if there's a problem in the text, the translator has to provide, the translator can do one of two things. Either leave the problem in the text and let you break your head over it, or solve the problem so that you won't have a problem when you read the translation. And so you'll see that translators notice this problem too, which is why they usually translate these words, we will do and we will hear, as we will do and be obedient. Okay, so the word hear or listen is translated as obey, which solves the problem. Okay, because we will do and be obedient. Okay, that doesn't put the cart before the horse. Okay, so how do you have it in yours?
We will faithfully do.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So again, they solve the problem. They don't have this weird formulation of agreeing to accepting an agreement without knowing the terms. Okay. So in any case, so this is why you have this debate. This little sentence led to a very big and long debate about whether the Jews had a say in becoming the chosen people. Okay, whether they were chosen like a bride, reciprocally, where she has a say, or chosen like a captive or a slave, in which the master chooses and the captive goes along with it. He has no choice. And these two opposing understandings of the Jews' role as a chosen people represent, so from these two understandings of what happened at Mount Sinai, was it a reciprocal choice or was it a domination? From there stem two opposing understandings of the Jews' shameful and shameful conduct and miserable fate ever since the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Because and starting at Mount Sinai with their worship of the golden calf, the Jews have constantly, at every turn, and for over 3,000 years now, drifted from the worship of God into idolatry, or in the modern era, secularism. Okay? And drifted into assimilation and intermarriage with the Gentiles around them. Okay? Now, at times they did this aimlessly, and at times they did it purposefully in a conscious effort to shed their Jewishness and escape persecutions and harassment and humiliations and pogroms that they suffered at the hands of their neighbors. And yet, despite 3,000 years of consistent effort, to try to escape their Judaism or their Jewishness, Judaism and the Jewish people remain. Okay, it's startling. You know, how can a people try so hard to escape Judaism, and yet this is the only people of the entire ancient Near East that still exist? Okay, so how would so again, if the two understandings of chosen is one is a reciprocal like a marriage, and the other is a master-slave relationship, how would the two camps explain this apparent miracle of Jewish survival? Okay, so how would those who see it as a reciprocal choice, like a husband and a bride, explain Jewish survival?
It was the people's choice and the people's initiative to make this covenant with this God that they chose. Their actions remaining faithful to that covenant that would have
right, but if there's but if we see them, if we see this bride cheating on her husband, trying to escape the marriage, how do you explain the fact that she's still in the marriage 3,000 years later, if we see evidence that she's trying to escape it all the time?
It would, I guess, have to be.
And by the way, this is not like historical, but just kind of as a conception of how do you explain this? It is a weird phenomenon. The small people that survive without their own land, without their own language, without a temple, for 2,000 years in the diaspora, whereas other peoples who remained on the land and with assets and everything else disappeared. Okay, so there is kind of this miraculous element that is explained by the chosenness. But of course, if it's a bridal choice, if it's a reciprocal choice, they'll understand this miraculous survival one way, and if it's a domination, they'll explain it another way. So, okay, so I interrupted you. So how do you think those people would explain Jewish survival in the first camp?
I think that perhaps one explanation is that as much as there's been some who went astray, there was some always faithful.
So look, you're right that some went astray and some came back. Okay, so it's kind of like the story of the Jews is a story of a repentant cheater. Okay, they stray from the marriage, but they come to see the error of their ways, and they come home begging forgiveness and promising to do better. Okay, we know this trope either from people we know or from the movies or novels. Okay, and the result is that over generations, what happens is exactly what you said. Those Jews who are less, so they all cheat. They all try to escape their Judaism. But those who are less appreciative of their special relationship with God, they indeed drift away and are lost. Which means that those who remain Jews are more committed. Okay? The others are not repentant, and so they leave the marriage. These guys are repentant. They're committed, and that's why they come back. And so the Jews chose God at Mount Sinai, and those Jews who remain Jews choose Him again every generation. Okay, so every generation, the Jews shed a lot of Jews who did not re-choose to remain in their relationship, and they thus retained just those who truly valued their relationship with God and re-chose Him again. Okay, and that explains why the Jews are such a small people. Okay? But it also explains how they've survived despite the hardship. Okay? Because it's a hard core of people who really value this relationship enough to come back and endure the hardships. Okay? So it explains the smallness of the people because we shed Jews every generation. Okay, how about the other group, the ones who see the Mount Sinai choice as God's choice forced upon the Jews?
It would, I imagine it would be the divine who perpetuates the people through the ages, and it's the divine's choice to invest in some, and maybe some go away, and they're just not of interest to the divine.
Right, so
it's more divine or God driven.
right. It's not that the Jews are coming back. It's not that the Jews are deciding, okay, I'll stay in this marriage. God is compelling them. You know, you're not going. I know you're trying to get away. I'm not going to let you. Okay, God is tripping them up as they try to escape. Okay, so these rabbis from this second camp see the Jews' miraculous survival as further proof that the choice was God's, not the Jews. Because if it were up to the Jews, as we see in the Bible and throughout Jewish history, they'd have dissolved into the general Gentile population and worshipped their gods long ago. Okay, they've tried to escape for 3,000 years. So if they are still here as Jews, then it's because God is frustrating their designs, their efforts. So for example, this is really nice. If you turn to Ezekiel, this is many pages forward, Ezekiel 20, verse 32, Ezekiel 32, 33. Ezekiel 20, verse 32, 33. And what you'll see there, so again, the context is God is speaking to the Jews who are again in exile, just like they were back in Egypt. And this is during the Babylonian exile. Okay, so God, so when they were in exile in Egypt, God made a commitment to bring them out of Egypt into the land of Israel. And here too in Ezekiel, God is speaking to them, and he commits to once again gather them from the diaspora and lead them back to their promised land. And in doing so, he says that he is going to confound their ongoing assimilation. Okay? And here, let me quote. Let me bring this up. So this is God speaking to the Jews in Babylonia. What you say that we will be as the heathens, as the families of the countries, meaning as the Gentiles, to worship wood and stone, will not come to pass. Okay? He said, what you want to become like the heathens, to become like the Gentiles and worship wood and stone, become foreign worship, will not come to pass. And then God tells them that he will bring them forth out of exile into the land of Israel. And this is what's so great about it. What he uses here, and you can see it in your translation, he uses the exact same language and imagery used in the Passover story, in the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Okay? So in the Exodus story, it says, again, this is the exact quotation from this is from Deuteronomy 26, verse 8. God says, the Bible says, God brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm, and with great terribleness, and with signs and with wonders. Here in Ezekiel, do you have it before you?
I do.
Okay. So he says, as I live, this is God saying, as I live, surely with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with fury poured out, I will rule over you. Okay. So this is not a coincidence. A mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and terrible fury or terribleness, great terribleness. This is a clear reference to that. This return from exile to that return from exile. So what's the author trying to convey by using this exact same lingo in God bringing the Jews from the Babylonian exile as he did from the Egyptian exile?
Would seem to it's God choosing the people.
Well, no, but like, why use the same or
It's the same kind of exile, or it's the same kind of deliverance, the same expectations. There's a parallelism.
well, I mean, it's a reference, but there's no parallel because look, who's when you read the Exodus story, and God's mighty hand and outstretched arms and terrible sign and wrath, etc., who is subjected to His mighty hand and outstretched arm and the signs and everything and wrath? Who's subjected to this divine force?
Egypt and then the foes of Israel.
Right. Okay. How about in Ezekiel?
Israel.
Right. Okay. So there's a parallel that's designed to show you the difference. Okay. There, the Egyptians were the ones who were keeping the Jews in exile. Here, the Jews are the ones that are subjected to this divine force and fury and compulsion. Okay, in Ezekiel, God's fury is directed not against the Jews' captors or hosts, but against the Jews as God bends His unruly subjects to His law and His governance. Okay, so the Jews are trying to assimilate. Okay, he says, you are trying to be as the heathens, as the families of the countries, as the Gentiles, to worship wood and stone. But God says, I'm not going to let you. It will not come to pass. I will bring you out with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with fury poured out. Yeah, so I will frustrate your designs and I will rule over you. Okay, so the reason for the parallel language is to show you the difference between these two. There, they're a captive people. Here, they're assimilating. They're willingly trying to leave God, or to leave Jewishness, or their Israeliteness. So if God Himself forced Himself on the Israelites at Mount Sinai, how has He kept? And look, we remember that scene with the golden calf. When they tried to stray, He killed them. Killed what, 30,000? Okay, fire, snakes. How has He kept forcing the Jews then to remain in their relationship over the generations for 3,000 years? So again, if we said that the first camp sees it as, again, a marriage, and that the cheater keeps coming back, every generation, a portion of Jews chooses to stay in their relationship, to come back and ask forgiveness. Okay, and that's how the Jews remain a people. In this conception that you see in Ezekiel, for example, how does God manage to do this? How does God manage to frustrate the Jews' effort to flee into the Gentile population?
Intervention and punishment, or refusing to intervene in favor of.
I
guess punishment and reward.
Well, but in what situation does He refuse to intervene on their behalf?
I suppose when we went over that within the tribe.
Yeah.
With the Benjamin or with the Benjaminites, when he didn't do anything to weigh in favor of the Israelites.
Okay, so when does He not? In what situation is He not intervening in favor of the Jews? In the year 500, and the year 1000, and the year 1500, and the year 1700, or the year 2000. So where doesn't God come and help him? Help him do what?
Establish a nation state with land.
Right, no, but why do the Jews need help? Why would the Jews need God to intervene in their behalf?
Because there's the Persians and the Babylon, like big powers all around.
Or no, but even
Lots
forget
of
that. During the Islamic Empire, or in Europe during the Middle Ages or the early modern era.
There's still a few. They're not as numerous as the Persians. The like all these assimilating empires that just take on.
Right, but why would you? Because you're saying correctly that God doesn't come and intervene to help them. Help them against what?
Help them from being consumed by another empire?
Well, or consume, even not by another, like Poland or Lithuania or Libya or Morocco are not empires, but
or assimilate.
Killed by, no, it's not. Look, they want to assimilate. Okay, they're not asking God, please help us to not assimilate. They want to assimilate. Okay, it's when their neighbors are killing them and raping their wives and daughters. That's when Jews are asking, that's the help, and God is not helping them. Okay, so the answer, how is God keeping the Jews in Judaism against their will? Okay, the Jews are, again, if we accept this idea that the Jews are trying to flee and God is forcing them, what's the mechanism by which He's forcing them to stay in this marriage?
Well, through other nations, or through their foes.
It's through anti-Semitism. Okay, so according to this view, look, anti-Semitism is this weird force. It's this very bizarre phenomenon. But according to this understanding of the choice of what it is that the Jews are as a chosen people, all of a sudden anti-Semitism isn't just this bizarre and persistent reality of life over thousands of years. Okay? It's a divine mechanism implanted in Gentiles to preserve God's chosen people as Jews. Okay? To continue to repeatedly, in every generation and every locality on earth, to continue forcing the Jews to remain Jews, to remain God's people. I forced you at Mount Sinai, and every generation, and wherever you go and try to assimilate, I won't let you. Okay? And the mechanism is that the Gentiles won't accept them. I won't let you live next door to me. I won't let you marry my daughter. I won't let you, and even if you convert, I'll still kill you. Okay, so in this respect, in this understanding of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is a divine test for both Gentiles and Jews. And so for Jews, obviously, it's a test of courage and perseverance and honor and allegiance, either to God or to their own heritage or identity. Because it makes, anti-Semitism makes Jewishness a heavy burden that Jews are tasked to bear. Okay, so not only do they have to observe the burdens of religious observance, but also the burden of resisting the temptation to assimilate, to convert, to escape. Okay, the pressure applied by an anti-Semitic environment. And for Gentiles, it's a test of their ability to overcome a divinely implanted sinful inclination or passion towards Jew hatred or violence or antipathy towards Jews. Okay. Now what I just told you is a kind of creative. The Talmudic debates are not textual. They build on the text, kind of seeing hints and allegories in them and trying to understand the text, or trying to understand the world, or understand God based on these creative readings of the text. So this is a fanciful or creative, non-textual explanation for how God has preserved the Jews as a separate and distinct nation for thousands of years, despite the recorded efforts of Jews to escape and assimilate. And remember, this whole explanation started with a sincere and legitimate debate about the nature of the relationship between God and Jews. Okay? Is it like a relationship between a husband and wife, or like the relationship between a master and a slave, or a king and a subject? And from there, from that weird sentence of we will do and we will do and we will hear, it goes from there to speculate as to two possible explanations for how Jews have survived as a people. Okay? But it's all, I just want to clarify, this is not textual, it's not biblical, it's extra biblical. It's theoretical. Okay? The Bible doesn't actually say that God uses anti-Semitism to accomplish this. Okay? It's a creative and speculative reading. It's called a drash, based on hints that people think they see in the text. But that's not our method. Obviously, we here read the text. So, what methods, again, in line with this understanding of God implanting or encouraging anti-Semitism in other people, what methods are written in this text explicitly by which you can see God trying to keep Jews separate and distinct from other peoples?
I
I mean, we haven't read it, you and I, but I'm sure you know.
It would intermarriage,
Right?
a certain kind of prohibition, and then when they go to war with certain peoples, there's a direction to kill every man, woman, and child, whereas it's different with like relatives. Like,
Right, yeah, but look, obviously those who are dead, you're going to be separate from. But the ones who are not subject to that extermination, you're right. Basically all the prohibitions. Okay, don't eat foods that your neighbors eat. Don't marry your neighbors, your Gentile neighbors. Don't worship your neighbors' gods. Circumcise yourself, unlike your neighbors. Don't shave your sideburns like your neighbors. Don't work on Saturdays as your neighbors do. Okay, and again, virtually every restriction in the book of Leviticus or in the Torah points to this. You know, all these restrictive do's and don'ts are designed to separate this people through their habits compared to their neighbors. Okay, how to eat, how to bathe, how and when and with whom to have sex, what to wear, what not to wear, how to raise your crops, when to raise your crops. It's very detailed and restrictive and onerous. So what I want to do today, before we move to Joshua, is just cover one category of these restrictions that are designed to separate and again, in the context of God, I don't want to say implanting, but encouraging anti-Semitism among the people towards the chosen people. So we'll just discuss the dietary laws, but the same applies to various other laws of purity, etc. So the Torah stipulates what foods Jews are allowed and not allowed to eat. And if you turn to Leviticus 11, you can read these rules about kosher foods. Okay. Now, scholars through the ages, and this really goes thousands of years now, have tried to identify some sort of pattern in these lists of permissible and impermissible foods, clean and unclean foods, in order to to try to find some pattern here that will reveal the meaning or the logic behind these categories. Yeah, because the text itself never explains why a cow and a fish are permissible, but a pig and a shrimp are not permissible. Okay? So, through the ages, some scholars, again, classical era, medieval, modern, early modern, some rabbis have and scholars have seen health logic at play. Others others see in these lists some sort of symbolic logic. Others see a spiritual statement in the division of kosher and unkosher animals. Others see in these lists sort of parallels to the act of to the stages of creation, and there are many other explanations or speculations and guesses. Really, all sorts of explanations that try to make sense of why is a pig unclean but a cow is not. Okay. So rabbis and scholars have offered numerous explanations through the ages to this question. Again, trying to show this not as arbitrary, but there's some sort of meaning here, some sort of logic that explains why this is so. And the reason why scholars and rabbis had to do this is because their Jewish parishioners, I'm sure, have asked them, as they ask today, every new generation of Jews ask their rabbi, why the heck do we have to keep these crazy kosher laws? Okay, because it is onerous, it's incomprehensible, and the Bible doesn't offer an explanation. Okay, it just says do this and don't do this. Why? It's not clear to me. The Bible doesn't explain, so I'm going to ask my rabbi. Okay, so because the Bible doesn't offer an explanation, then the rabbis try to read God's mind to try to see some spiritual or moral or religious or medical or political logic or economic logic or purpose in these weird dietary laws. And so the obvious question is, why did God choose these animals and not those animals? But given that God, the Bible doesn't explain, the obvious question is, why wouldn't God explain the logic or the purpose behind these dietary laws? So look, so we know that the Torah, written by God, doesn't offer. Okay, we don't understand why God didn't do it, but why then? Why would the authors of the other biblical books, why don't they ever explain it? Because I'm sure that Jews in the ancient, in biblical times, were as perplexed by their dietary laws as medieval Jews were, and as modern Jews are. Okay? But the Bible never offered them an answer. Okay? So it's clearly a choice. People were asking, and yet the biblical authors never gave them an answer. So why would the Bible choose not to answer this obvious question? It's clearly a choice, because the question isn't just theoretically obvious, it was historically asked. And we know it was historically asked because rabbis kept offering answers. Oh, it must be this. No, it must be this. No, it must be this. So why wouldn't the Bible, which was written over hundreds of years, okay, wouldn't any of these books offer an answer?
Borrowing from the verse you read a little earlier, do before
That's good.
hearing.
That's good. Yeah. Look, I didn't even think of that, but you're right. God doesn't want to explain his logic to you. Okay? God doesn't want you to judge whether the law is necessary or unnecessary, or wise or silly, or moral or immoral. Okay? Your job is to do, not to judge. Okay, so look, obviously you and I are speculating here. We can't know. But I think the Bible's silence might indicate that there very well might be no logic behind these rules. Okay? It might very well be that it's completely arbitrary why locust is kosher, but a cricket is not kosher. Okay? Or beetles are not kosher. Okay, so it might be that these rules are arbitrary on purpose because of exactly what you just said, or what that we will do and we will say, we will do and we will listen. Because the meaning of submission to God's will is submitting to requirements that we do not understand or do not see good reason for. So submitting to instruction that you think is a good instruction, that's not submission. You do it because you think it's right. Okay? So think, for example, of Abraham, taking his son up Mount Moriah to slaughter him. Okay? Abraham did not understand the logic or purpose of God's demand. But, for reasons that we discussed, he had come to trust over his 7 encounters with God. He had come to trust that God is good and that God knows what's best and that God and what's right. Okay? So these dietary laws might be there to force us to choose in the same way as Abraham did there. To choose, are we going to submit to something simply because God told us? Not because we evaluated it and approved of it. Okay, I see it's for medical reasons. Okay, it's wise, so I'll do it. Or it's because it has this spiritual meaning, which I agree with, and so I'll do it. Okay? No, simply because God demands it. Okay, will you do that? Will you do something that makes no sense and is onerous? Okay, and I believe, again, if we move away from, again, what's called the drash, this extra textual explanation, and stick to what's called the pshat, which is just what the text says, I think the text argues in favor of the arbitrariness explanation. Okay, and in fact, the nice thing about it is that it's in God's own word. So if you turn to Leviticus 20, verse 20. Verse 24. Verse 20. No. Just a second. It's not there. Yeah, okay, yes. Okay, so why don't you read it just so that we will get the accurate English translation.
So 2024, and said to you, you shall possess their land, for I will give you.
So this is a prediction of what will happen to the Jews when they enter the Holy Land. Okay, go ahead.
You shall possess their land, for I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I, the Lord, am your God, who has set you apart from other peoples. You shall set apart the clean beast from the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not draw abomination upon yourselves through beast or bird or anything with which the ground is alive, which I have set apart for you to treat as unclean. You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and I have set you apart from other peoples to be mine.
Great. Okay. So it says twice, I am trying to set you apart from the other peoples. Okay? And by the way, this comes at the end of 10 whole chapters that deal with, these are the purity laws. Okay? They deal with personal purity, ritual purity, and moral purity. Okay? And these chapters, so again, there are 10 chapters that end here. And these chapters include that chapter 11 that deals with the dietary laws. Okay? And so what you see here, at the end of these 10 chapters that deal with the purity laws, is that actually God does give a reason or purpose for all these purity rules, which again includes the dietary rules that we happen to focus on here. Okay, so I am your God, or whatever he said, who have separated you from other peoples. Okay, and that's why, again, just like you read it, this is what, and so you shall therefore distinguish between clean and unclean beasts, between clean and unclean birds and insects, etc., which I've separated for you. And you will be holy to me, okay, because I am holy, and I have separated you from the other peoples, from the Gentiles, so that you should be mine. Okay? So God is giving you an explanation. Okay? It's to separate you from other people. Okay? And turn also now, if you go back to Leviticus 18, where God instructs the Jews to not follow the practices of the Egyptians and the Canaanites. I mean, it's too long, we won't read it, but it basically, 18. Yeah. Okay, so you see in verse 3. Okay, don't do as the Egyptians did and as the Canaanites do. Keep my laws and everything else. And then it's a list of things that you shall not do as the Egyptians. Don't do what the Egyptians and the Canaanites do. And here's a list of everything you shouldn't do. We read about this before when we talked about Noah and what it meant to basically, what's the word where you sleep with your relatives? Gosh, I can't believe I forgot.
Incest.
Incest. Thank you. It should be the first thing I think of. So God doesn't explain or justify the various rules of purity listed in these 10 chapters, just like he never explained in the diet in the kosher chapter, the chapter 11, why these animals are clean and those aren't clean. But God does clarify that these rules are meant to separate Jews from Gentiles. Okay? And so the obvious question is, why does God want this separation? What does this separation? Yeah, what does this separation convey to Gentiles, and what does this separation convey to Jews? Okay, so when the Gentiles see these people who don't do this, and this, what does it convey to them?
It would.
Or what's the effect? Yeah.
The effect would be, it's somehow these people who do these things for this higher reason look down on the Gentiles, or look down on those who don't.
Exactly. Look, first of all, it makes them weird. Okay, I'm going to purposefully make the Jews look weird and bizarre to their neighbors. Okay, so first of all, mark them off as different and odd and stuck up. Okay, because they claim to be chosen. They won't eat your food. They won't drink your wine. They won't marry your daughter. Okay, so it creates this tension and enmity, and I know of anger, but enmity between the Jews and their neighbors. Okay, so perhaps all these rules, these endless rules, which God says, I'm basically picking what your neighbors are doing and telling you not to do that. Yeah. And all, again, just all sorts of weird laws that don't seem to make sense, but mark you as weird. And separate, again, it prevents you from eating with your neighbors. So perhaps all these laws are that mechanism. Maybe this is how God has encouraged, triggered anti-Semitism in non-Jews as a mechanism to undermine the Jews' effort to escape their Jewishness, blend in, assimilate, and escape their hard and painful special role. Okay, because we've already established that God cannot implant anti-Semitism supernaturally into your heart. Okay, God does not control your heart or mind, at least not the way Jews, and definitely not the Bible sees it, as we saw with Abraham and with Pharaoh and elsewhere. So this is an earthly, if you give the Jews rules that mark them off as weird, odd, they separate them, they make them seem aloof or stuck up, and that naturally triggers some sort of enmity or resentment. So look, when we talked about Pharaoh's heart, we saw that that term hardened Pharaoh's heart doesn't mean that God compelled Pharaoh's heart to resist God, because again, God can't do that. Okay? God played a psychological chess match with Pharaoh. Okay? He gave Pharaoh unconvincing evidence and thus encouraged Pharaoh's skepticism. Okay? So perhaps in the same way, God encourages Jew hatred among non-Jews by making Jews observe all these weird laws that separate them from their neighbors, make them seem different, odd, exclusive, etc., to non-Jews. Okay. How about, so that's what these rules do for, these purity rules, dietary rules do for, that's their effect on Gentiles. How about for Jews? What does this, if God is trying to separate Jews from Gentiles, to trigger that response in Gentiles, what does it do to Jews? What does this separation convey to Jews?
You would see other Jews would be similar. Like there'd be a kinship sort of between people following the same practices, and there would be a the fact that it costs something could perhaps make you more invested in the cause.
Well, yeah. Look, this is going back to that marriage thing. That some would see it as a worthy relationship and worthy of all the ridicule and pain and the annoyance and just the annoyance of all this observance. But yeah, so it would convey to them that they are a different people, in that they, unlike other people or peoples, are subjected to these odd rules that their ruler dictated to them. Okay? God chose them and is subjecting them to His will. Okay? God demands that that God is demanding that we submit to Him, no matter how arbitrary and incomprehensible His demands are. In the same way that He demanded this from Abraham. Do what I tell you. You don't need... submit to me without understanding and without agreeing. Not just without understanding. Obviously, Abraham doesn't agree that Isaac should die. Okay? So the question is, why is, going back to the original question, why does God want them to submit to rules they don't understand? Why not explain the purpose and function of these rules? Or let's take an easier case. Why did God demand this kind of submission from Abraham in the binding of Isaac? Again, not speculation. We're told in the text why God did it.
In order to see if Abraham was worthy,
right? So we're
or if Abraham trusted God fully.
Exactly, but and where does it say so? I mean, you're absolutely right. Where does it say so?
I can't think think of it off the top of my head.
No, but why do you think it? Forget the text now. But look, you read that story. What made you think that this is why God wants him to do it?
Because it wasn't until it was the point of no return. He made him go through the every act until Abraham couldn't physically stop himself. And then there was a divine kind of intervention.
Right, so he had to see it. God had to see Abraham lowering the knife. So look, we're told twice. At the very beginning, before God tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, we are told that God tested Abraham, or that God, put Abraham
to the test.
Yeah. Okay, so we're told at the beginning that this next episode coming up is a test, that God is testing Abraham. And then we're told at the end, with a knife, that Abraham just passed the test. Because God says, now I know that you are God-fearing. Now that I see that you're just about to slaughter your son, now I know. Okay, so the reason why God, so a test. So why does God need to test Abraham? I'll say it. So we understand that God is demanding this kind of submission because he wants to test Abraham, and he's glad that Abraham passed the test. But why does he need to test Abraham?
I guess the covenant comes through his offspring and his patriarchy.
Yeah.
So, I suppose God's entire plan is going to go through this one person.
Right. Obviously, Abraham is very important, but why does God need to test him? Why does God need to test his faith?
Apparently God wouldn't know it.
Right. God can't see into Abraham's heart. Okay, just like you and me, we judge. Look, you can tell whether your wife loves you or hates you, not because you can see her heart, but because you see her actions, and based on that, you see her inner life. Okay. We know for certain that God didn't know whether Abraham was truly God-fearing. And but we know this for certain because God tells them, now I know. Now I can see with my eyes that you really are God-fearing. Okay, so God, because God didn't know what's in Abraham's heart, he designed a test that will reveal it based on Abraham's actions. Will reveal whether Abraham is truly a believer, truly trusts God. Okay, because look, we know, and God tells us this at the very end, we know that God doesn't need or want Isaac slaughtered as a gift to him. Okay, we know it because he never wants it. And we know it because he tells Abraham, I don't want Isaac, I don't need it. Okay? So we know that God doesn't want Isaac sacrificed. And we know also that God can't use all of our burnt offerings at the altar. And God isn't affected whether I'm eating a pig or eating a cow. It doesn't affect God. Okay, God doesn't need me for his sake to eat this animal rather than that animal, or to sacrifice stuff to him. Okay, so he made that demand on Abraham, and these demands on us about purity and how to plow our fields and what to eat and how to sleep with our wives, etc., etc. He made these demands on Abraham and on us to see whether we will submit to arbitrary, odd, and incomprehensible commands. Okay, and there's again a book that we're not going to read in Hosea. How do you pronounce it in English? Hosea? Is that
Hosea?
Okay. In chapter 6, verse 6, Hosea says, speaking for God, I desire goodness, not sacrifice. I demand obedience to God, not burnt offerings. Okay, now that's a silly. It's a silly statement, because of course Hosea knows, as every one of his listeners knows, that God does in fact demand sacrifices and burnt offerings. Okay, it's written explicitly in the Torah. Okay, sacrifices here, how many, which kind, how many times a year? Clearly, God demands it. Okay, so any reasonable Jewish audience of Hosea would have understood Hosea when he says this. I desire goodness, not sacrifice. I desire obedience, not burnt offerings. A Jewish audience would have understood him saying that God doesn't demand sacrifices because he wants to eat the cow that you're sacrificing. Okay, he doesn't want the offerings themselves. Instead, God demands sacrifices. For example, Isaac, or you foregoing pigs, or sleeping with your wife anytime you want. God demands sacrifices to see whether people are obedient to him. It's a test. Okay, I demand obedience. I don't demand the sacrifice. I demand the obedience. The sacrifice is just a test. It's a means of me looking into your heart. Okay, so look, Jews refer to Mosaic law, to these 613 do's and don'ts in the Torah. They refer to it as the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, Ol Malchut Shamayim. And it's a yoke, of the kingdom of heaven, because it signifies that you are ruled by this king. Okay, but by observing these onerous and arbitrary laws, observant Jews acknowledge outwardly by their conduct, and therefore inwardly to themselves, that God is their king. Okay, so they do what God tells them, because God is their king. God said so. Okay,
so in the scenario, would it be that if the laws were rational, like if they were based on reason or health or whatever it was, like reasonable things towards self-preservation, there'd be an ambiguity as to whether someone was doing it for self-preservation or doing it in obedience to the divine?
You don't need, when you are obeying an order that you agree with, it's not an act of submission. Okay, you already agree with it. Okay, look, when you boss your daughter around, okay, tell her, wear a coat. Okay, I'm sure you've had this numerous times, where she asks you, why? Okay, sometimes you explain, but sometimes you just say, because I said so. Okay, and that really is an appropriate answer from a parent to a daughter or a son, or from a boss to an employee, or from a master to a slave, or a king to a subject. But you will never try that with your neighbor or with your friend. Okay, like if you tell if you're at a bar with your buddies, and you tell your friend, like, let's say that you see I don't know, a bug in your or some sort of contaminant in your buddy's beer, and you tell him, pour your beer out. He asks you why. you'll never think of saying, because I said so. But with your daughter asking why I should wear a coat, that's a completely acceptable answer. Okay, because with your daughter is a, the because I answering a question why with because I said so is a test of that person's submission. Okay, what a test is, can your son, or your employee, or your slave, or your subject, can your son accept internally that you are his boss and that he has to do what you say even if it makes no sense to him? Okay, that's the test. That's the question that your son has to answer, or your daughter has to answer, whenever you say, because I said so.
So it would prioritize obedience and faith, I suppose, over reason.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Will you agree to do something you don't understand and don't even agree with? Think of Abraham. He doesn't agree with the order. Can you make yourself submit because you accept, again, internally, he is the king and I'm the subject. I am submitting. I don't understand the order. Makes no sense to me. But my role in this relationship is to submit, not to judge the logic, the morality, etc. Okay? So, and again, think of if God needed a test to read Abraham's heart, then of course he likewise needs a test to see into the Jews' heart, whether they're submitting to him. And again, and look, sometimes people say, because I said so, to their kids, just because they don't have time to explain everything. Okay, and so they're pulling this trump card of authority. Okay, but look, no matter the rush, you will never use that with an equal, with your friend at the bar. Okay, it's simply, friends are not your subordinates. Okay, and so of course they'll fail that test every time. They don't accept you as their king, but your daughter should. Okay, and so that's why whether you're rushed or not, that should be enough, because you want her to accept that you are her boss, and what you say goes, even if it does make sense. Okay? But that's not why she should do it, because it makes sense to her. But because you said so, and she, like Abraham, trusts in God, she should trust you that you know what you're doing and that it's a good idea. Okay. What you asked, what you said earlier about the rationale that people find here, that when you find rationale, it's not submission. Okay, so what grade would you give Jews in this test? If God gave them their dietary laws to test their submission, what is God seeing in Jews based on their conduct with regard to his dietary laws?
Everyone's very astute at calculating their self-interest, and sometimes observing the dietary laws are not in their self-interest. Or, but pleasure or whatnot.
Yes, look, obviously the Jews who don't observe dietary laws are clearly not submitting to God. Okay, they're putting their own preference over what the law says. Okay, they don't see logic in these laws, and so they don't comply. Okay, they'd comply if they thought
see the logic.
The laws made sense. But since they don't comply. And so clearly they are failing the test of submission. But how about the Jews who do keep kosher? Okay, are they passing the test?
Yeah. Trying to think. Like if they're so the question in my head goes to whether their outward conduct is what's relevant, or if there's somehow, if they're
Yeah.
going through the motions or not, would make them more culpable.
Yeah, no, look, Jews are required to go through the motion. Okay,
Right. So,
Judaism is a
and
religion
they're
of do's and don'ts. Yeah,
and whether they believe in what the motions are or not, it doesn't matter. It's just
right.
whether they're going.
Yeah, no, but look, it's funny that you say they going through the motion. Jews are doing the opposite. Okay, I told you when we started today that over the past 2,000 years, observant, kosher-keeping Jews, devout Jews, and their rabbis and commentators have offered endless theories, explanations, to explain the logic behind God's lists of kosher and unkosher foods. Okay, so they're doing the opposite, actually. Okay, it's not
they're
that
rationalizing.
they're finding, so they are finding meaning. Okay, so it's not that they're it's not that they're just going through the motion. They're doing the opposite. They're infusing these prohibitions with great spiritual meaning. It's the opposite of going through the motions. Okay, so are they passing the test that Abraham passed?
In that sense, no, because they're not being obedient. They're just rationalizing things.
Right. The
obedience is not as you can't stomach obedience as easy as you can stomach a rationalization.
Right. So the question is, are they demonstrating submission to demands that they do not understand any better than Jews who don't keep kosher? Okay, because these Jews too, the kosher keepers, look, I'm sure that there are some who kind of go by what we talked about today, that these are arbitrary, I don't understand, and it doesn't matter. It's not for me to understand, it's me to obey. I'm sure some do. But based on the rabbis' answers over the thousands of years, we know that a lot of them see meaning in it. Meaning with which they agree. Medical, spiritual, other variety. So they're also failing the test. They're not submitting because I said so. They're submitting because it has great... Look, like I said, the ones who don't keep kosher, if they agreed with the purpose, if they saw purpose there that they agreed with, they'd also keep kosher, but they don't. Okay, so the explanations that kosher keepers offer demonstrate that they, just like the non-observant Jews, they demand to understand why God wants them to do X or Y. They need to know why. Okay, they're not satisfying with, again, I'm generalizing, but again, based on the rabbi's answers that do give explanations and meaning to these rules, they're not satisfied with keeping kosher simply because God said so. They question why God wants this. Okay, they put God's demands to a rational or to a human test to see if we can make, or if we or my rabbi can make sense of this. Okay, and if you think of Abraham as the model of submission, that is not how Abraham responded to the arbitrary and senseless test or demand that God demanded of him. Okay? Abraham didn't understand it, but he didn't submit God's demand to a test of human reasoning or human morality or human medicine. Okay? Abraham's experience with God had taught him to trust that God is real, God is good, God is moral, and God knows what he's doing. Okay? And so what he did in the binding of Isaac demonstrates that Abraham learned to trust God's judgment better than his own judgment. Okay? Which again illustrates to us why Abraham's faith and trust in God is highlighted as singular in all of Jewish history. Because all of us, we need to understand why we're doing this. Okay, and that's it's a failure to if we're right that the whole point of these rules is arbitrariness to test submission, then But by seeing meaning, by seeing patterns and logic, then we're doing the opposite of what Abraham did.
But in the Abraham story, isn't it? So we talked about, when we were talking about Cain and Abel, this natural understanding of what's right and wrong, or even if that wasn't it, this understanding of right and wrong after the eating of the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of knowledge. In that Cain is still somehow culpable, even if there was no law at the time, for killing Abel, because it's wrong. Like, surely killing Isaac was wrong on that same standard.
No, because look, I could say the same thing about killing the. Look, we'll talk about this now with Joshua, killing the Amalekites, man, woman, and child. Okay, so clearly, look, if the God of the universe, again, in the monotheistic conception of the God of the universe as good and just, and having superior moral knowledge, if the God of the universe tells you, do this, then you have to trust that God has superior moral judgment than you do.
But in the Cain and Abel story, God had not said, do this or don't do this
yet.
So then, is that a completely blank slate? Like, it didn't matter what he did one way or the other? If we do hold him culpable, though, then we have to hold somebody culpable even when God says, don't do this.
Well, look,
if God says, do something that would be against that, if we do give that initial position, then that's weird, which seems to be happening in the Abraham and Isaac story.
Yeah, but look, we talked about this because we were, in Cain and Abel, we were wondering, what is this punishment? Okay, that's not a punishment. Punishment for murder says that you can't have this job, you have to have another job. And you become, you have a family, you become the founder of a great city and the professions, the manufacturing professions. We just, not only do we not see a punishment, we see a reward. And Lamech saw a reward. That God gives this, the only murderer on earth has divine protection. Nobody else has it, but Cain has it. And the explanation given as to why Cain doesn't receive a death penalty is because it was manslaughter. Because he didn't know that murder was wrong, because there was no law yet. Okay, so that is.
Why does there need to be anything if there's no law yet?
Yeah, why is it even manslaughter?
Right. And if there is some threshold, then when God says if there is some threshold of culpability without law, when God tells you to disobey that whatever natural, like you don't kill people, you don't kill your kids.
Yeah.
If God tells you to do that, that's weird. Like there's a weird tension.
Well, but look, the difference, you point out correctly that the difference between that and this is that here, God told you to do X, whatever it might be. And again, the big question when God tells you to do something is to question yourself, am I crazy or is this God? But if you're convinced, if you come to be convinced that this really is God, then of course it's your duty to obey, because God has better moral judgment than you do. That's obvious. Okay? But in Cain, as you said, that's not what happens. God didn't tell him to do this, and God didn't even tell him not to do it. God is not part of it. And so maybe, to answer your question, is it wrong if there's no law against it? The law came out of this act. Okay, so this first murder was the kind of the setting, the impetus for establishing a law that taking human life is wrong. Okay, and God tries to communicate that by telling the rest of humanity, don't kill this man. Okay? Later he finds out that actually that's a bad way of conveying that law, that lesson. Okay, I've actually done the opposite. Instead of telling people that murder is wrong by protecting Cain, I've sent them the opposite message. I've signaled to them that murder is laudable. because I've rewarded Cain, and that's why he changes the law about capital punishment. Okay, and so maybe the answer to your question is, why does it have to be anything? Is that look, again, it's not kind of blasphemous. It's blasphemous to say, but what we've seen here is that God learns over time what these people are that He's created. He learns to understand human nature, and so He's responding to outrages after they happen. Okay, when humanity goes off the rails, He starts again with Noah with a new set of rules. Okay, when in Cain, when all of a sudden there's murder, He responds. Okay, but it might be, humanity did a lot of things that God did not anticipate. Obviously, God often gets angry, genuinely angry. God is surprised. God regrets what He did. Wishes He hadn't done what he did. So maybe this murder is something that God did not anticipate, and once it happened, He used it to establish a law: don't take human life. Okay, it's just that He communicated that law in a self-defeating way by protecting Cain. So maybe that's the answer about Cain. But with Abraham, it's clear. Because God trumps divine morality, of course, in monotheism. Again, if you think that the gods are arbitrary and capricious and evil, then that's a different thing. Like if Zeus tells you to do something, that's not necessarily by definition a just act. But if God tells you, then by definition, it's just. It's more just than what you think is justice. Right?
I'm anticipating different things, but it seems like Job throws another wrench into this whole thing.
How so?
The way we understand justice, Job shouldn't have suffered. But there was something else going on outside of our understanding. And I guess that would just...
No, but look, in Job, and again, we'll talk about in Job, but to your point, look, we talked about with Cain. We talked about this exact issue. Job and his friends think that if Job had been... Job thinks that he is a righteous man and therefore shouldn't suffer. His friends think along the same line that
wicked should suffer.
That Job is suffering, which means that he's probably not righteous. He probably is wicked. Okay, but they both agree with what you just said, that the wicked should suffer and the righteous should not suffer. But the message of the book of Job is the opposite. Okay, God comes out of the storm, and He chastises the three friends, and He says, "You've spoken, wrongly." Okay, and when Job demands an answer as to why did this happen to me, God does. Look, you and I know the answer. Okay, you and I know why Job suffered, but God doesn't fess up that he had this bet with the Satan. Okay, God's response to him is, "Who are you?" Right? You remember that big speech, yeah?
The whirlwind speech, yeah.
Where were you when I did all of this and created the world? Basically,
the ostrich, the behemoth, the leviathan.
Yeah. Like, who are you to ask me? Who are you to try to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing? Okay? So basically, what he's telling Job is exactly what he told Cain. Cain also, he's scratching his head. Why did you do this to me? Why did you discriminate against me? It's unjust what happened to me. I am It's theodicy. I am a just man who is suffering a cruel fate. I gave a good gift to God, and God rejected me, but accepted my brother. It's not fair. And God doesn't explain to Cain, and he doesn't explain to us why he rejected Cain's gift. He tells him, move on. I'm not going to explain myself to you. Move on with your life. And it's exactly what he tells Job. I'm not going to sit in the in the witness box for you to try to justify myself to you. You're not competent. Okay? So it's this submission. Again, not that Cain had Mosaic law, but with Cain it's not submission, but his message is the same. It's not my job to explain myself to you and to get Cain's approval or acceptance for why I did this and not that. It's not for me, God, to explain to you why you shouldn't eat shrimp. And then if you agree, then you won't eat it. It's not for me to explain to you, Abraham, why you should kill your son for me. Either you do it because I tell you, or you don't. Okay, that's obviously your choice. Just like when you tell your daughter to wear a coat. Okay, you could explain it to her, but you don't think that you need to. You think that saying "I'm your father" is enough, should be enough, because you want her to accept her proper role in your family. She's here, you're here.
But the underlying message of what we were just talking about would be that God's justice isn't why our understanding of justice is not why you follow God, but it's because God is powerful that you follow God. Because he's God, not because he's just as we understand just.
Yes. Well, look, it's a tense. Look, this is also a big topic of discussion in Jewish commentary. What is the authority of the law? Okay, I think I told you about this kind of story, parable, about God having an argument with the rabbis over what trumps what. You know, if God gives you an order that goes against the Torah, which should you follow? Because you have God's written orders, and then you have God's spoken order. If the two clash, which trumps? Okay, and the message coming out of this parable, this story, the verdict of the rabbis. And again, I forget if it's the rabbis discuss it. I think they're having this kind of legal debate with God. Which has more authority, the Torah or God himself? And the verdict is the Torah.
But then wouldn't Abraham lost? If Abraham had the Torah at the time that he sacrificed Isaac, he shouldn't have been listening. He should have been reading.
Right.
And then he would have gotten the wrong decision.
I mean, I agree, but this is just based on this story, this fictional story. But it's made, the story is there to convey something about the authority of the Torah since the Torah has been given. Okay, so look, the Torah is this gift that God, because up until then, God spoke to individuals. He spoke to Abraham, he spoke to Isaac, spoke to Jacob, to Moses, to maybe a few others, Miriam. But he spoke to individuals. And then with the Torah, he speaks to every Jew. Okay? Here you have God's word. You now know it's the revealed will of God. It's a recipe book for life. Follow this. Okay? And so now, if you hear God speaking to you, look, that's what the third commandment. You know, this issue with false prophets. If you hear a voice in your head and it conforms to this, then fine. Okay? But if you hear a voice in your head that does not conform to this, so if God came to you today, now that you have the Torah, and told you to sacrifice your son, you know that you're crazy. And you have to go and check yourself in. Or if somebody else comes and tells you something contrary to what's here, as the third commandment says, now that's the test. The Torah is the test of whether this guy is a prophet or a false prophet. But that's after we have the Torah. That was not the case with Abraham.
Abraham's got that weird thing where, like, I think he's called a prophet by, is it Avimelech? He's called,
Yeah.
Avimelech refers to him as a prophet, but he's not ever referred to as a prophet like the other later prophets are referred to as prophets.
I think you're right. I don't remember. I think you're right that Avimelech refers to, because Avimelech is a priest to the high God, to El, and I think he refers to Abraham as a prophet. But he's not. Look, the prophets that we think about, the role of the prophet is in monarchies, in Jewish monarchies. And the prophet is the voice of divine justice, chastising political authority. And obviously that's not the situation with
Avimelech or Moses, because Moses doesn't have a king. He is the political authority.
Yeah, so I've heard references to Moses as a prophet, but usually I've heard it in. It just might be a coincidence. I've heard it in the States. Growing up in Israel, the term that's attached, usually when you say Abraham, you say conjoin two words: Abraham our father, Avraham Avinu. Okay. For Moses, it's Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our rabbi or our leader. Okay. So he's known as a teacher, as a leader, not so much as a prophet. Okay. There's the only one that I can think of who is this kind of mix of prophet and something else is Samuel, because Samuel he's a judge, but he's also a prophet. But that's because up until Saul's coronation, Samuel is the national leader. He's the national political leader. He leads them in wars, like any other judge. And then once Saul becomes king, then he steps into the role of the prophet, which is again the spiritual authority, which is separate from the political. Yeah. But I know what you mean about Moses as a prophet, but it always struck me as to my ear a foreign appellation, because we don't see him as one of the prophets, and he's not, obviously. There's a collection of books that are, these are the prophets. It's a specific time and a specific role that they occupy, and it's not Moses' role. Okay, so look, let's move into Joshua. I don't want to keep you too late. But so look, so this discussion about chosen people among other peoples is an easy transition to Joshua, which deals with the conquest of the land from its native populations. Now the conquest is covered in the chapters that you've read, and then the second half of the book deals with the settlement of the 12 tribes in the various locations. It's a fairly dry book, but it helps sharpen the understanding of the relationship between the chosen people and the other peoples, and other peoples. Now, first, before we get to this issue, the book of Joshua and the Torah before it, Moses' speech to the people, introduces the concept of a nation state. It goes back to this question of what the Jews are. Are they a religion or a nation? What the Torah envisioned, and then what Joshua enacts, is an Israelite state populated by people who, again, all the previous inhabitants are to be not driven out, killed, exterminated. And what remains is an Israelite state populated by people who share a common ethnic origin, common language, common history, and a common religion. Okay? Just like a modern nation state. Okay? And what's interesting is that this concept of what you and I would recognize now as a nation state is a peculiarly biblical invention, which again, it's commonsensical to us because we all live in nation states, as did our parents and our grandparents. But that was not the case back then. The Israelites were unique among the peoples of the ancient world in that they had prescribed borders. Okay, in Moses' speech, and then with Joshua, or then in the book of Joshua, God gave them a land and outlined its borders for them, clarifying that this land is theirs, but everything beyond it, everything beyond these God-given borders, belonged to other nations and was not. The Israelites were prohibited from conquering it. Okay, and you can see it if you. I'll just kind of read it to you, but you can find it in chapter 2. All of these references are in Deuteronomy chapter 2 in Moses' speech to the people. He says, Moses tells them, he says, take good heed of yourselves, therefore, meddle not with the children of Esau, for I will not give you of their land. I have given Mount Seir, meaning the Edomite territory, to Esau as for a possession. Do not harass Moab, the Moabites, nor contend with them in battle, for I will not give you their land for a possession, because I have given Ar to the children of Lot for a possession. And when you come near the children of Ammon, harass them not, nor contend with them, for I will not give you their land, for I will not give you of the land of the children of Ammon any possession, for I have given it to the children of Lot for a possession. Okay, so the Torah and Joshua introduce this novel political model that stood in sharp contrast and in rebuke to the empires of the ancient world, of the ancient East. Okay, which were states with unlimited land claims, and which ruled over a mix of local populations with different ethnicities and different languages, different cultures, different religions. Okay, so the Bible rejects for the Jews, rejects the model of a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual, and multi-religious polity. Okay, and it promotes this, what was at the time a novel political model of one nation state for one nation, one culture, one language, one God, tied to this one piece of land. Okay. Now, when God explains the boundaries that I just read to you, that He sets for the Israelites, now we finally understand. At the end of the Torah, with Moses' speech, we finally understand why we had to read all those long, boring genealogies that you and I skipped over. Okay, the whole genealogy of Ishmael, the whole genealogy of Esau. It's an entire chapter, a very long chapter in Genesis. The genealogies of Lot. Okay, so all these genealogies of this guy begetting that guy, and who begat the other guy, who begat and begat and begat. We all skip over them, okay? But to the Israelites back then, first of all, we skip them because it's kind of boring, but also we don't know these people. These names are meaningless to us because these people don't exist. These peoples don't exist. But to the Israelites back then, these genealogies were a useful guide to the geopolitics of their new land. Okay, these genealogies are not in the Bible simply to show that God fulfilled His promise to Abraham by making his other seeds, his other descendants, into great peoples. That God was true to his word, and he made Ishmael a great people, and Esau a great people, etc. Okay? Instead, these non-Israelite genealogies are recorded in the Israelite book to explain to the Israelites which locals, which neighbors are cousins, and therefore are maybe allies, maybe rivals, but they're not enemies. Okay? And which neighbors are cousins and therefore should be treated one way, and which neighbors are strangers, not from their family line, and therefore should be treated as enemies, as mortal enemies. And this is also the function. So it explains who your neighbors are, but it also acts internally, because you have the same exhaustive genealogical lists of the Israelites themselves. This is in the book of Numbers. These very detailed genealogies of the heads of families in the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Simeon and the tribe of Levi, and just these very long lists over time. And they're again, for us it's boring, because again we don't even have these tribes anymore. But for them it was a kind of, they read as a national and tribal flowchart which mapped out the status of different tribes within the nation, and the status of different families within each tribe. And these genealogies identify the historical relationships between families and between tribes. Okay, that these tribes are together. Okay, and you can see it in the ancestral connections from the time of the desert. Okay, so the point is that these lists, these genealogies, were functional in daily life for determining leadership within the nation and reciprocal obligations between families or between tribes. They explained the order of travel in the desert, which tribe is before which, and etc., and also the location of the settlements in the new land, the tribal territories. They explained marriage compatibilities, that my family marries with your family, but not with that family. Okay, and determining all sorts of practical things like blood retributions. Okay, so if somebody in my family is killed, which families are supposed to come to my aid in carrying out the vendetta? Okay, so the point is that these genealogy, now that we get this prohibition, you can't attack these because they're your cousins. You can't attack the Moabites because they're your cousins. But you should attack the Girgashites, the Canaanites, because they're not your cousins. Okay, so now we understand the function of those genealogies. They're not ceremonial, but functional guides to organizing social and economic life, both in the desert and in the land of Israel, both internally revealing real-life relationships and interactions and histories between tribes and families, and operating as a kind of written constitution, explaining who's who in the nation and what are the alliances, etc., but also internet outside the nation with your geopolitical neighbors and rivals. Okay? So kind of outlining what is proper and improper in domestic relations and in foreign relations. Okay? So what it brings us to is the conquests. So you can conquer these people, but you have to conquer these people. And the obvious question that always comes up with the book of Joshua is the war of annihilation and destruction that we read about. So look, I have no doubt that you were struck by the genocidal cruelty of God's instructions and of Joshua's execution. Okay. Now, some commentaries or commentators argue that if you read Joshua 11 verse 1 through 5, 11, here. So some use these verses to 11, 1 through 5, and then if you jump past that, you can look at verses 19 and 20. So chapter 11, 1 through 5, and then 19 and 20. Some commentators argue that these verses indicate that perhaps the Canaanites came to attack the Israelites as the Israelites moved into the land. Okay? And so this war was a war in which the Israelites destroyed those Canaanites who attacked them, but they signed peace treaties with those who sought peace with them. That's the one in 19 and 20. Okay, that they attacked these people who massed up to attack them. I mean, they fought them, but they signed a peace treaty with this other nation, this other group. So you can read these verses in Joshua 11, and you can judge for yourself. I certainly think that these verses give an opportunity to make this argument plausibly. Okay, so there's an argument to be made to that effect. But the opposition, the prosecution would point out, look, it describes just one incident. Okay, this alliance, this peace treaty. Okay, it describes one incident rather than a pattern throughout the conquest. Plus, even that, it's more of a hint than a clear statement. Okay, the Israelites fought a defensive war, when attacked, and preferred peace otherwise. So it's possible that the Israelites were attacked, but it's also possible that they attacked. Okay, so again, it is a possibility, and you can argue about it, but let's put this possible hint to the side and deal with the overall image that most readers get from the text of a harsh and unforgiving war of conquest and extermination. So again, with the proviso that there is an argument that perhaps it's a response to the Canaanite attack, which again overturns the immorality into morality. So assuming, disregarding this perhaps hint of a defensive war, why is God so cruel and genocidal in his instructions to the Jews?
So having recently read that Sachs commentary, I'm a little bit wrapped up in that. So the explanation would be that the Israelites have a new way of doing things, a new law, a new regime, a new nation, and that any external influence or external influences of a certain kind threaten that entire project, and so they must be annihilated.
So that's a. Where does Sachs get that from?
He sets it up as after the flood, there's a new. He calls it a new way, but just a new way of life.
Okay. That
the Israelites are to embody, and they keep on straying one way or the other. But there's punishments and things to keep it intact, and that outside influence, especially that of who are not, I guess, in a family in some way, are especially dangerous to corrupting that new way. Like the Amalekites, the Philistines, the Canaanites.
Yeah. Well, look, the Philistines are not, the Philistines are as adulterous and as violent, not adulterous, idolatrous, as idolatrous and violent as the Canaanites, but there's no instruction to annihilate them. They're not Canaanites. Okay?
It's true. But they can't intermarry, and they still have to. They have their, like, I guess the Philistines have their land to the west, southwest.
Yeah.
But they can't. They're not supposed to associate or bring any of their artifacts or anything with. They're just supposed to keep them back. They're not supposed to. I guess Israel's not a melting pot for Philistines.
But look, the Israelites marry non-Israelites.
Edomites, Moabites.
Yeah. Aramaic wives. All the matriarchs are from.
But they're in the they're from Terah. They're from the issue of Terah.
Yeah, no, but look, but they're idolatrous. The family of Lavan, Laban, is they're idol worshippers, and certainly the Moabites are too. So, but that's not the issue. Sachs reasons this. I'm not even saying that he's wrong. Okay, but he's reasoning that hey, the Jews have this new way of being, and outside influences are challenging to it, and therefore they must be destroyed. We could argue that reasoning because the question is, well, what about Ruth? Okay, she's a foreign influence, but forget that. But my point is not that whether he's right or wrong, but whether he is reasoning it or he's reading it. Okay, and look, there's a very long and rich and robust tradition, starting with the Talmud and continuing evermore, about reasoning on top of the text. Okay? And that's a very well developed field, but our method is, as we established at the beginning, is we're reading the text. Okay, and if you when you read the Torah, you see that religiously we're given a clear answer in the text as to if you take a look at Leviticus 18, verse 24. Okay, 24 to 30 is the section. But this question of why is God so cruel and genocidal, we're given a clear answer. Okay, that it's divine punishment for Canaanite cruelties and iniquities. Okay. And God said so a number of times, that this is divine punishment for what the Canaanites did in the past, so their cruel ways. Okay, and God says at various times. Okay, do you see that in Leviticus 18?
So I have 22.
24 to 30. So again, don't do what what the other people are doing, and don't do all of these sinful practices that have destroyed the land. And if you do, then the land will vomit you out in your filth, as it is doing, as it threw out the people before you. Okay, and all the people who do these kinds of disgusting things will be killed. Okay, so he's telling the reason why these Canaanites are suffering this fate is because they're doing terrible things, and if you do that, the same will happen to you. Okay, and God says it a number of times in other locations, in various locations in the Torah, and I don't know if every time, but in some of these cases, it pairs this explanation for why this is happening to the Canaanites with a warning to the Jews that the Jews too would be punished with loss of the land, with death and destruction, if they committed such heinous crimes.
But do the descendants of Esau or of Lot partake in these things?
What we're told is no. Well, actually, we're not told. What we're told is that the Canaanites have earned their punishment. You know, that we're told, again, from a religious, we're giving, this is a religious explanation. There's sin and punishment. Okay? The reason why this is not unjust, this isn't cruel and unjust, just like, look, if I showed you a firing squad killing a man, you'd say, hey, that's unjust. It's mind-blowing. But if I gave you the background, no, you see, this guy is a traitor. You know, he's a soldier, and he sold, secrets to the enemy, and because of that, the enemy came and destroyed the city of Dallas and killed all these millions of good people. You're going to say, oh, okay, he's a traitor. Therefore, this firing squad is not committing an act of tyranny. They're committing an act of justice, of proper punishment for evil deeds. Okay, so that's what God is saying here. Okay, they earned their harsh punishment. Okay, this is not cruel; it's just. Okay, and again, in clarifying that this is based on the act, on their evil acts, by saying, if you, Jews, do the same thing, the same will happen to you. Okay, so we have, again, I don't know about, maybe the explanations, the reasoning, Sachs and many others, on top of the text, maybe they're also true. I don't know, I don't deal with that. But the text tells us, the text offers us a religious explanation that God himself, in his own word, offers. Okay? This is punishment for past crimes. Okay? But if you move from the religious explanation that God himself offers to a more earthly and military level, if you move from God to Joshua, the military commander, why would an Israelite commander, again, whether the commander is Joshua or God, doesn't matter, but on a military level, why would the military commander give an order to kill every man, woman, and child? And again, let's put aside the evidence that we have in the book of Joshua and in the book of Judges, that the Israelites at times didn't or couldn't follow this order. Okay, so I want to focus on why God or Joshua gave the order. So why would the military commander, again, so we understand religiously, that God gave an explanation, this is punishment, we don't know exactly what, but they deserve it, fine. But militarily, why would the commander, Joshua or God, want the Canaanites killed?
It seems like if the women and children are spared, they still can seek vengeance.
Right.
They're still potent.
Well, look, the women and children are not...
When they grow up. Or, I don't know if that...
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. You're taking their... You're creating a rationale for vengeance on their part. Okay? So look, ancient people, you're right, okay, but there's, beyond that, when you think of the custom in ancient conquests, actually forget ancient. Ancient people, like modern people, either killed conquered populations, or exiled them, or enslaved them, or taxed them. I mean, I can't think of other things you do with conquered peoples. Now so again, exile, killing, exiling them, enslaving them, or taxing them. Okay? Now the Israelites couldn't exile them to some faraway place because only empires could do that. Like I can't exile my dog to your house because you're at the door. Okay? If I had 2 houses, I could. Okay? So the Assyrians could take a population and move them there because they own all this real estate. They choose. The Israelites, they can't do it because they're not a vast empire. So what's left to them are the 3 others: killing them, enslaving them, or taxing them. Okay? So, if we think that the killing is problematic, why wouldn't Joshua accept either taxing them or enslaving them? It sounds like a great deal. You get some free income if you're taxing them, or you get free labor if you're enslaving them. So why not do that? Again, putting aside the religious argument that we just had about they deserve to die for their crimes. But why again, somebody without any religious, let's take away God here, but why would Joshua, purely as a military commander, want or argue against enslavement or taxing?
In both situations, you still have to keep either the taxed or the enslaved under a certain amount of control, which uses resources. I'm thinking of Thucydides here, where like the Spartans always had this problem with their enslaved population revolting against them, and it was always an additional problem. In addition to all of it was an explanation as to why they weren't imperial like Athens.
Yeah. So the argument, like with the Spartans and the Helots, about the threat of rebellion, that's true too. But that's a long range, or a long-term worry. Not tomorrow, in 2 or 3 generations, when the children grow up to be men, it might be a problem. Okay, but on a shorter term, what would lead a commander to say, look, we can't do this. I know having slaves is great. You get somebody else to do all your work. I know having a local population pay taxes to you so you don't have to work as hard is great. We can't do it. Why couldn't they do it?
So I have a sex explanation in which the slaves they'd still have their occult practices in their homes, and that would still have, and your children would see that, and their children and your children would correspond. Like there'd be corruption in your midst.
Look, that is definitely true, and that's a second. So the one religious argument is divine punishment. A second religious argument is what you're saying now. But I'm saying purely on a military level, right now. Joshua is a military commander, not a Jewish leader, not a religious leader. Look, if you think of
the logistics of like what do you do when you enslave? Like, who do you give the slaves to? How do you divvy up all the booty? How do you?
Oh no! Look, that's just kind of negotiations. Okay, but look, getting free stuff. That's a rich man's problem. How will I divide all this good stuff among my people? We all want to have that problem. Okay, the problem is when you don't have stuff to hand out. No, the issue is again logistical, is more economic. Okay, because when I said that conquerors could either kill, tax, enslave, or exile. Again, so we eliminated exile for the Israelites. So we're dealing with enslavement or taxing. An empire can tax the locals or enslave them even, because the conquerors don't come and live there. Okay, if you think of the Assyrians or the Egyptians or the Babylonians, the Greeks, okay, they conquer, they leave some officials to govern the locals, and they leave. Okay, so they can set up slave operations, mining operations with slaves run by an overseer. Okay? Or they can leave the population there, have some officials collect the taxes every year, but they're back in Egypt, or they're back in Assyria, or wherever. Okay? This is not that situation. The Israelites conquering Canaan, they're not conquering it like the Assyrians conquered, or the Egyptians conquered Canaan. Okay? Here, you, the conqueror, want to settle in this same land where these people are living. Okay? So the locals have to go. Okay? If you want to settle here, if you want to live here on this land, then the locals cannot live here anymore. Okay? Because the land can sustain only X number of people. We were talking before the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution that really increased dramatically the productivity of agriculture, or today the genetic engineering revolution. Okay? But agriculture was basic. It could sustain so many people. Okay? And if you want to imperially run this thing, then fine. All you need to do is leave officials. But if you want to settle here, then if your aim is to conquer and settle, then you can get rid of the locals by exiling them as free people or slaves, doesn't matter. But if you cannot exile them, as we've already established the Israelites could not, then there's only one way that the locals could, for the locals to go away. If you can't exile them, the only way for them to no longer be here is by the sword. Because you can't afford to keep them around, even as slaves. Because slaves and laborers need to eat. And if the land can only sustain X number of people, okay, so we have a written justification for God's harsh treatment of the Canaanites that's written. We can take that to the bank. We can reason other explanations. Sax's more spiritual one, this military or economic one, rationale for Joshua's harsh treatment. So we can reach for these various justifications as we cringe at the descriptions of this war, of these wars. And again, and my military explanation, and Sax's spiritual one, and God's written one, moral explanation, and many others. There are many other explanations as to why this is justifiable. Okay. The question is, why do we feel the need for these justifications? Okay. Why do we feel the need to defend the Bible against the charge of cruelty?
It would seem to go back to like our conscience or something. Like, killing in war is one thing, but killing people who are defenseless, like in their homes after their husbands or fathers have been killed in war, is another.
Well, but I mean, look, obviously, you and I know that when we read this, goodness, I mean, it's terrible, and we, Sachs, others, reach for explanations, to try to solve this. I can't simply accept that God or that this book celebrates this kind of genocidal violence. Okay, my question is, why do you and I feel this way? Like, I know that we and I feel this way, okay, and that they're defenseless and women and children, etc., etc. But are these battle scenes in Joshua cruel because the Bible is cruel? Is this book cruel, or is it because ancient warfare was cruel, and the Bible happens to describe life in the ancient world? Okay, my question is, when you compare what you read in Joshua's war to what you read in Homer and Thucydides about what happened to the vanquished in the Trojan War or the Peloponnesian War,
it seems like the vanquished are almost always enslaved in one way or another.
And yes, I mean, look, they're
in the other stories.
Yeah. Well, they're either
the women and children are always enslaved. They're always enslaved, except for like in Milos, which was the exception that almost proved the rule.
Yeah. So, but again, so does Joshua's war seem, when you think of what happened to innocent populations in the ancient world in wars, where look, what happened to them is first of all death and destruction. those who were left after the battle were enslaved. Okay, so rape for the women, enslavement for the men and children. So when you read Joshua against the chronicle of wars in ancient chronicles, does it still seem cruel, or does it seem on par with how ancient peoples fought wars?
So it was my understanding that ancient peoples fought wars. There was an option before you got wiped out in battle to enslave yourself and your family to the winning party in the war. And then maybe later on, like, you could have family members from some distant place come and buy you off, buy your family's freedom, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, there was an option, this ransoming, but again, it's only for rich people. But you're right.
But that wasn't even an option for
Right.
It seems harsher. It seems like the only option is death, and death is terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, it seems like the people who were about to be killed might want that other option of, hey, can we figure out something even if I'm going to be a slave?
Yeah. No, 'cause look, we know from incidents from slavery in the Bible that people did enslave themselves. Slavery in the ancient world in general, and not just the ancient world, medieval, the Middle Ages as well. People enslaved them, or colonial America. People enslaved themselves as a commercial interaction, indentured servitude. So yes, look, slavery was always an option in war and in peace. So you're obviously right that here the option of enslavement is not given to the conquered population. But look, I'm saying this because not because I'm disagreeing, but because I don't know. I don't know if we know that for people reading the Bible in the 20th or 21st century, this seems jaw-dropping. It seems cruel. The question is whether those ancient Jews, the original audience of this book, Jews in the land of Israel in the 11th or 10th or 9th century or 8th century BC, whether the descriptions of Joshua's war sounded cruel or sounded like war.
Later on, I can't think of it, but doesn't Saul ultimately make a bad choice because he doesn't kill the women and children, he enslaves them?
Yeah, so that's a there's a...
It's with the Amalekites, I think.
It's the Amalekites. So we'll talk about that, because there are, usually in war, you take the plunder, including the people, those who survive, as your reward, as your payment, because these are not professional armies that get a salary. Their salary is, they're kind of like bounty hunters. Okay, if you're successful, this is your payment. If you're not successful, obviously you don't get anything. But that had to do with a religious instruction given by Samuel to Saul, which Saul doesn't observe. That's not the case here. These Canaanites are to be killed, man, woman, and child, not as part of a religious, well, I guess it is a religious order. But it's not, there's a word that's called prescription. In Hebrew it's cherem. And the Amalekites are designated by Samuel in the go to war, in the military orders, as cherem. And the Canaanites here are not. So look, but on the other hand, the instruction does come from God, so maybe it could be seen as a religious duty, but the cherem is a legal category of sacrifice to God. So I would separate that war in Saul from this. But to the question of whether the original readers of this book would have seen it as cruel, or would have seen it as a descriptor of war in the ancient Near East. I really don't know. Okay? But what we do know for sure is that, okay, sorry, I take it back. We don't know for sure, but I have to believe that 2,000 years from now, or 3,000 years, correct, from now, your descendants and mine will faint at our cruelty when they read about our wars, about how we just dropped exploding bombs from the air against on our enemies, rather than shoot individual people with some sort of self-guided laser beam or something. Okay, so and that's why I asked you the question about Homer and Thucydides, because if Joshua's war is more cruel, is uniquely cruel in the ancient world compared to Homer, Thucydides, etc., then fine. Then the question remains: why is God so cruel? But if ancient wars are kind of, if Joshua's war is on a par with what the Hittites and the Greeks and the Assyrians, etc., did, then the question to ask is, why don't we cringe? Look, when we read about the Trojan War, or the Peloponnesian War, or the Battle of Kadesh, between the Egyptians and the Hittites, we don't cringe. Okay? We don't ask this moral question about the Greeks. Okay, and trying to find a rationale of why they treated the Trojans in this way. It's just not how we read it. Okay. So why is that? Why do we criticize God or question God or Joshua for excessive cruelty and genocide, but not the Greeks?
So I remember something in the Iliad where
Agamemnon?
Wasn't Agamemnon, it was his brother. It was why can't I think of Helen's husband's name at that? Can't think of it. Anyways, the whole war was at his behest, because Helen, his wife, was taken by Paris, and he's in this war, and everyone's going to war for this cause.
Menelaus.
On the surface of things, and Menelaus is in a battle to the death with Trojan foe, and the Trojan foe offers to give himself up for ransom to become a slave until he's ransomed off. And Menelaus takes him as that, and that's almost a criticism at Menelaus for not being committed enough to kill all of them, because these are the people who took his wife and caused this whole thing. So it's it seems like it's something that is played with in the ancient,
but
whether you're willing to take a slave, or whether it's a commitment to kill them all. There's a principled reason to do it.
Yeah, well, and again, as an aside, you can see here that ransom is an option for aristocrats, because dirt farmers don't have anyone to pay their ransom. They're not valuable. They can be killed. But so there's this tension with aristocrats, whether to kill them, to do the right thing and kill them, or to do the rational thing, and that is to use them to make money through ransom. And Saul's sin is keeping the Amalekite king alive, and who knows, maybe that's why. But yeah, look. So you're right that his sparing the enemy is seen as a failure. Okay, a failure principle.
It's failure principle.
Yeah. Okay, and so again, but we don't read this description with this kind of, how could you? Okay, like for Joshua, we're uncomfortable with it. We're uncomfortable with Joshua, we're uncomfortable with God. We're not uncomfortable with the Greek generals, or the Assyrians, or the Egyptians. And I don't have an answer. I'm genuinely asking why it is that we express this discomfort with Joshua's wars in a way that we don't with other ancient wars we read about that are also very jaw-droppingly violent and cruel, with death, destruction, burning, mayhem, rape, etc. I mean, is it because the Bible is not just a history book, but it's a religious book about divine justice, whereas Greek histories don't make claims about the histories do discuss justice, but is it because the Greek gods don't claim to be just? You know, that we accept that that the order of the universe is set by capricious, passionate, violent gods in the Greek world, whereas in the monotheistic world, there's a claim to a just divine order?
Well, maybe, I think that's a good point. But even in the Greek world, I can point to a way of thinking where it's cowardice not to kill the men, women, and children on Agamemnon's part in this. Like, he just didn't, he wasn't committed enough to the principle. Whereas I can't point to that in the Hebrew Bible, where that's said explicitly or even implied, except for these stories.
Yeah. Although again, even that. So again, it's. Let's assume that that's true, okay. But when we accept that the proper, honorable way to behave is to kill everyone, we don't see it. We don't read that statement and have this cringe effect that we do when we read Joshua. And it might be the fact that this book doubles up as it's a war story, but also it's a story about God and a God who claims to be just. You know, so when the gods are openly amoral, obviously we're not going to be troubled by injustice in the world. Okay, there's no theodicy problem if the God doesn't claim to be a good God. Okay, the only time we have theodicy is when we observe injustice in a world governed by a good and just God. Okay, and you can see this when you think of the flood stories in the Bible and in Gilgamesh. Okay. In the Bible, God destroys the world because human beings are bad. Okay, it's a just act. Okay, God is just, and He's punishing people by killing them because they're bad. But in the Sumerian version, the gods destroy the world because the humans disrupted their afternoon nap. Okay, the humans were being noisy with their commerce and whatever else, and so the gods unleash a flood. Okay, so in the Bible, the nature, the moral presentation of a good God who's doing a good thing, a just thing, sets us up to wonder whether we agree or not. You know, is God really just in destroying everyone in the flood, including the babies? Including the animals, okay, destroying little sinners alongside with big, the pickpocket with the murderer. Okay, so the moral framework puts us in a moral mindset as we read. Okay, this is never something that we consider in the Gilgamesh story, Because if the gods are capricious hotheads, then injustice in the world is to be expected. It's not a problem that we need to solve. Okay? But again, I don't know. I don't know why we have. I mean, obviously, I think this is the explanation I give myself, but it's completely speculative. It might be simply because this is our book. We have this heritage connection to this book, whereas the other books of the ancient, or the other chronicles of ancient wars, we're reading them like anthropologists. We're not as connected to them, as it doesn't reflect on us, perhaps. I don't know, but maybe it's a literary thing where the Bible has a moral framework, and therefore we read it with a moral mindset, whereas Judaism has a moral universe, and therefore we read the Jewish book with a justice-oriented mindset, and being sensitive to theodicy, whereas the Greek or Egyptian or Assyrian or Babylonian world or universe is not governed by just gods, but by, again, capricious, violent, hothead gods, or unfathomable gods, and so the problem of theodicy doesn't arise. We don't read those texts with a sensitivity to injustice, because it's to be expected. Okay, so look, before we go, it's late. I'd like to get back to where we started today, and that's with the concept of a chosen people. Okay, as a possible explanation for the cruel and complete extermination of the Canaanites. Again, I'm putting aside the historical evidence. I mean, the evidence from the text that they were not exterminated. I'm just focusing on the instruction and God's expectation to exterminate them. At the start of our discussion of Joshua's conquest, so we ignore the fact that the Israelites didn't exterminate them and focus on God's command. But we do know that Canaanites did survive Joshua's war, because we read about them later in Joshua and in Judges and in Samuel. So we know that the Canaanites remained in the land next to and among the Israelites. So we don't have to speculate what would happen if they didn't exterminate the Canaanites. We see later in Joshua and Judges and Samuel the result of the continued Canaanite presence in the land of Israel. So what was the result? So maybe we can surmise why God wanted them exterminated by seeing what happened when they were not exterminated. Yeah? So what happened?
There's ongoing conflict, ongoing paganism.
Well, it's not the conflict. Look, God isn't troubled by conflict with the Canaanites. In fact, he wants the conflict to be sharper and deadly. He wants them to be killed. Okay. You're right. The constant theme of Judges and Samuel and the Book of Kings and the various prophets, the repeating theme is paganism. Okay. Actually, if you skip to Judges 3 really quickly, Judges 3, where is it? Verse 5 through 7.
I have the Israelites settled among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They took their daughters to wife and gave their own daughters to their sons, and they worshipped their gods.
Right. Okay, so and again, this is at the beginning of the. So Joshua dies in chapter 1 or chapter 2 in the book of Judges. Okay, so the book of Joshua, then Judges. Joshua dies, and then this. Okay, so the result of the Canaanites remaining in the land is pagan worship by Jews of local Canaanite gods, Baal, Ashtoreth, others. So the Israelites mixed with the Canaanites, married them, and wouldn't you know, with Canaanite people come Canaanite gods. Okay? This sin of worshiping foreign gods is repeated time and time again in the biblical books that follow Joshua's conquest. Okay? Now, so we discussed earlier the rules God enacted to separate his chosen people from the Gentiles. Okay, we listed the prohibition against intermarriage as one of those rules of separating. Okay, but there's something odd here, since we know, like we said, that all the patriarchs married foreign women, as did Moses. Moses had foreign women. Okay, Samson married a foreign woman. Naomi's 2 sons in the book of Ruth. King David, King Solomon, thousands of foreign women. Okay? But really, just, Moses is the one who gave this rule. Okay? How could Moses prohibit the Jews from marrying foreign ladies when he himself married a Midianite from Arabia and a Cushite from Ethiopia? Okay, so actually, let's solve this problem through the text. Do you have another 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you flip to Exodus 34, verses 11 to 16. You don't have to read it out loud, just kind of read it for yourself.
Just 34, 11 through 16.
34, 11, 16. And then, tell me when you've done that. Okay, now jump to Deuteronomy 7, verse 1 through 3. And actually, it's a good thing we're reading it because it has here, you remember that word of religious prescription where you have to kill everyone? Mm-hmm. Cherem, it is mentioned here in verse 2. Deuteronomy 7, verse 2, it uses that word. It says, "Hachrem tachrim otam." I don't know. Actually, how does it translate it? Verse 2.
Verse 2 is...
God gave them to you.
And the Lord your God delivers them to you, and you defeat them, and you must doom them to destruction. Okay, so in Hebrew it says, and God will give them, give them in your hand, and you will strike them, kill them, I guess. And prescribe them. The translation for the word cherem, again, it's a kind of religious gift. There's a burnt offering, there's other kinds of offering, and then there's cherem, which is translated as prescription. And it says, and you will strike them, and you will prescribe them, and don't sign treaties with them, and don't grant them mercy. And verse 3, don't marry them, don't marry them, don't give them your daughter to his son, and don't take his daughter for your son. Okay, but in verse 1, we just skipped over verse 1 because I was interested in the translation. It says, in the land that you're coming to conquer, and to dispossess many peoples, the Hittite, the Girgashite, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzite, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. 7 peoples. Great and powerful. And then come verse 2 and 3. Kill them,
with this prescription and everything else, don't marry them. And just like you saw earlier in Exodus 34, it lists the people. Okay, the Torah's prohibition on intermarriage is not a blanket prohibition against marrying all non-Israelites. Okay, it's a specific prohibition against marrying Canaanites. Okay, the inhabitants of the land of Israel at the time the Israelites settled there. Okay, you read that in Exodus 34, right? Yeah. So and so now when you read these, when you read the text that prohibits intermarriage, you can see that now all of a sudden the marriages of the patriarchs and of Moses and of Samson and of David and Solomon, etc., make sense. Because they're all married to non-Jewesses, non-Israelites, but none of them are Canaanite. They're not married to Canaanites. Okay? And in fact, I'm sure you remember when we talked about this, the book of Genesis goes out of its way to clarify that Abraham's descendants did not intermarry with Canaanites. Okay, I can give you the verses if you want, but but we've discussed most of them when we discussed the patriarchs. Okay, the only exception is Esau, who married a Canaanite, and it's clearly explained as a bad thing, which his parents opposed. And that's why his grandson Amalek is regarded as a Canaanite and is included in this prescription. Okay, but again, the Torah's point is that even if Esau's line did mix with Canaanite, the Israelite line, Jacob's line, never did. It has always been separate from the Canaanites. No intermarriages, no Canaanites in this bloodline. And I remind you of the rape of Dinah, of Jacob's daughter, where even when a prince wants to marry her in a situation where she has to be married because she was raped, according to the local custom, it's his duty now to marry her, and he wants to do the right thing, to follow the law. The Israelites will not have it. No intermixing with Canaanites. With others, yes, all the time. Okay, so the obvious question is then, why is it okay to marry foreign ladies, but not Canaanite ladies? What's so bad about Canaanite women in particular?
It seems like they're paganism, like they come from Canaan, the line of Canaan, back from after the flood.
Oh, yeah, no, okay, no, but yeah, but they're tainted with the sin of the curse with the sin of Canaan. Yeah, but that's not it. Doesn't it never appeals to that, right?
Yeah, it always appeals to the pagan worship.
Yeah, but again, we know that other people are pagan too. The Ethiopians and the Midianites that Moses married, the Aramaic people that the patriarchs marry, the Moabites, Ruth's people, Orpah, they're all pagans too. Okay, so clearly, look, it can't. If it were paganism, then you can't marry any foreign women, which they do.
So it'd just be that they're dispossessing these particular people of their land.
Right, but again, there is a kind of a warning about foreign worship. But why is that a problem with these people, but not those people that you are marrying? Why is the Canaanite pagan worship a problem, as you read in Exodus and Deuteronomy here, but the other people's paganism is not a problem? Look,
are these people's paganism, are they more devout pagans? They're more devout towards their gods, they won't give them up?
I can't imagine why they would be. Look, you remember when Rachel left her brother.
Yeah, she took the idols with her.
She took the idols, yeah. So she's a pagan, but it's okay.
And she was adherent. She took the idols with her.
Yeah. So look, they're all pagans. They're all women, and they're all pagans. Some are marriageable, some are not. These are marriageable, these are not. The only difference is geographic. Okay? There's something about these pagan people in Canaan Yeah, I think the obvious answer is that, look, the Israelites are settling in Canaan. They're not settling in Midian, or in Moab, or in Haran, or in Egypt, or in Edom, or Ammon. Okay? Now, in the ancient world, well, you already know this, the gods were local. The gods came with the locality. And when you moved in, you worshipped the local gods that controlled the elements in that locality. Okay? And again, if you think of what you just read in Exodus 34 and Deuteronomy 7, the prohibition on marrying Canaanites is explicitly explained there as an effort to prevent Canaanites from drawing Israelites from the worship of their God to the worship of Canaanite gods, the local gods of this land that they're settling in. Okay, so this might be a second and less spiritual, less karmic religious explanation for God's seemingly cruel order, to destroy all the Canaanites, every man, every woman, every child. Because if the locals remained in the land, okay, so it's not so much a kind of a, what Sachs says, but there's the new order, and if there's remnants of the old order, then the new order can't be. It's a practical thing. If the locals remain in the land, then the local pagan worship will remain, and it will draw Israelites into idolatry. And when you intermarry with Canaanites, when you bring a Canaanite woman into your home, then she will educate your children in her ancient local religious customs. By contrast, if you bring an Egyptian or Moabite or Aramaic woman, Aramaic like Rachel, into your home in the land of Canaan, she's not going to worship her ancient, the gods of her youth, because those gods are in Egypt or Aram or Moab. Okay, the gods go with the locality. Okay, because she is now in a new locality. Okay, when you bring her from a foreign territory into the land of Israel, she is now in your locality. Okay, in the land of Israel. So she will follow the practice of the local religion, okay, as was the custom all the time. Okay, so but Canaanite women, by contrast, they are not going to abandon the gods of their youth when they marry your son, because they remain in the locality of their youth. The local gods of Canaan are still there, in that river over there, in that tree, that holy tree, or that sacred rock. Okay, the divine forces that they grew up with or imagined, they're still there. Okay, that's not true of the Egyptian woman who is now in the land of Israel. Okay, and this is why I wanted you to read these verses in Judges. The Canaanites indeed were not exterminated. They did remain, and just as God had feared, the result was indeed an Israelite addiction to idolatry, for which God punished them repeatedly, until the Israelites were eventually defeated, dispossessed, and exiled from their land, just like He warned them. Okay, so the Torah actually offers two religious explanations for the command to destroy the Canaanites. One is backward looking, okay, punishing the Canaanites for their past crimes. But the second religious explanation is forward looking. Okay, it's an attempt by God or Moses or Joshua to insulate Israelites from the pagan worship of the local inhabitants. Okay, and it's merely one part of God's many efforts to separate the Jews from the Canaanite peoples among which they are going to dwell. Okay? Including the prohibition against marrying Canaanite women, but not other foreign women. Including the dietary laws, including the other purity laws, including the incest laws, etc. Separate them. Okay? And so maybe that kind of paints this, again, we all cringe at this, but I think the fact that we see the results of Joshua's failure to kill them all might explain the spiritual. Forget the spiritual. Forget the, or it might explain the kind of the forward-looking, practical religious explanation for it. Okay, which is completely separate from the backward-looking explanation that God Himself offered, that the Canaanites just need to be punished. All right, this was a long session. I apologize, but we finished everything. Anything else?
No, not right now.
Okay.
What next week?
Judges. So I love the book of Judges. So now the readings will be short, because like the longest story in Judges is Samson, which is four chapters. So relatively short readings. So we'll do them each of the major judges we'll do separately. I guess no. I guess we'll do Ehud and Deborah together because they're very short. But then Jephthah or Yiftach separately, and then Samson. I guess Judges now. It's a lot of fun. All right. So I'll send you the reading list, the chapters, on email.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So next week morning. 9:30.
Next week, 9:30.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Take care. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. Thank you.